We have a wonderful group here and a fascinating and important program that we're starting. This is actually being live streamed. I should warn you all. And for anybody who's tweeting out of this place, there's a hashtag up there, EdTech Connect. And it's always kind of fun when you see what people are tweeting out of things, as long as they tweet responsibly and in a way that common sense media can rate as suitable for children. I'm Jeff Cowan. I'm the president of the Annenberg Retreat at Sunnylands, and we are proud once again to be partnering with the Lead Commission and Common Sense Media. The fact that this is really the third partnership that we've had, all having to do with education and technology. Sunnylands, of course, is now best known as the place where President Obama's had two summit meetings, the most famous being the meeting with President Xi Jinping of China. But we also take on a few major issues where we think that real progress can be made by small meetings and then some follow-on activities. And one of our key fields at Sunnylands is education and technology. And we've been so proud to partner with Common Sense Media and with the Lead Commission. The Lead Commission originally issued a report which described 4 areas where progress really needed to be made to have a real impact in this field. And one of them was professional development, the topic we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be all listening very carefully to these terrific panels to try to see what can be the next steps to really make this, this aspect of education profoundly different because of the work that we've all done today. So I want to thank you all for coming and tell you that we are listening carefully to what you're going to say today and hoping that out of it comes something truly important, and of course all of you are already doing such great work. The person who really, I think more than any, of course we have Jim Steyer and we have Margaret Spellings and we have Lee Bollinger, all as the chairs of the Lead Commission, but nobody's done more work than Jim Coulter, who really can define this issue so well. And at the meeting that we had about trying to distribute technology everywhere and make it available to all young people, Jim did a great job of leading that conversation and summing it up. And to start us off today and explain to us our marching orders for the day, I'm delighted to call up Jim Coulter, not only the chair or co-chair of the Lead Commission, but of course the chair of the Texas Pacific Group. Jim Coulter.
Jeff, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be back here in Washington, where at least in EdTech things are definitely happening. So I'm here on behalf of my colleagues at the Lead Commission. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we started really 2.5 years ago with a charge from the FCC and the Department of Ed to use a little bit of a bully pulpit to make sure that we were raising both the level of our game in EdTech nationally, but also the level of the discourse, and that discourse is what brings us here today. Caroline, we began with a study of the industry, and in my day job, I do have a day job, I'm an investor. We get to look at a lot of industries, and the 2 industries that have fascinated me most in terms of their complexity are healthcare and EdTech. Enormously important, enormously distributed, and enormously difficult. But normally when you talk about healthcare or ed, you tend to fall into all the things that aren't happening and should be happening. But what we found as we got into the industry is what amazed us is how much was happening. Because of cloud software and tablet computing, we had suddenly come to a point, promised ever since the Oregon Trail, remember that? Where EdTech could be deployed at a level, rate, and scope that would change education in this country. Next slide. So we came out with fairly simple recommendations about 1.5 years ago, and we'll touch on a few of these today, but I want to call your attention to number 5, because ultimately any of us who have been involved anywhere in education know it's about the people. A year ago, we had a conference like this, and if you looked at the topics on this agenda, if you can read the print that small, you would find that most of it was about how do we get the market going on a device and connectivity path. And as part of that, we barely touched on the people issues, but as we get farther and farther into this, people like Mark Edwards will tell you, if you put the devices in the classroom, nothing really happens unless the people are ready to. At LEAD, we've always talked about not one-to-one, but one-to-one-to-one, adding a teacher into the device and student paradigm. Lots happened in the past year. The discourse about EdTech has changed fundamentally. The way I read the chart on the left, we're more or less speaking about EdTech publicly at about twice the rate we were 2 years ago. So the noise and scope of the discussion has increased. But what makes me more interesting is if you look at some of these articles, Natasha, you're here, No Child Left Untableted from the New York Times. Stories of incredible philanthropy in the area. Microsoft and Newton partnering up. It's across individuals, it's across government, it's across companies, and it's spread. You see here a banner you would normally see, the St. Cloud, Minnesota Times. When you get the Heartland talking about one-to-one, things are beginning to happen. Washington has gotten on board. I mean, think about this. We now take it for granted, but the State of the Union this year had a major pillar in it about EdTech, with an announcement of $2 billion of commitments out of corporate America to support the effort. The FCC has stepped forward. You know, infrastructure is not the most exciting thing to talk about in any industry, and certainly not in EdTech, but until we have something to connect the devices to, and until we have high-speed internet in the classroom, this can't happen. And over the past year, we've had $2 billion redirected, can change 15,000 schools in terms of internet speed, and we think we're going to hear more out of the FCC over the coming year. That's $2 billion efforts in Washington in 1 year. Very few areas anywhere in the economy that's occurred. We continue to see good leadership from the Department of Education. I want to call your eyes to the middle here. Technology isn't an option that schools may or may not choose for their kids. It's not an option anymore, and the fact that the discourse has reached that level means that the action can follow. We're going to hear a lot from Jim Shelton about the progress here, but there's a big focus on leadership, and particularly leadership at the superintendent level. Anytime any of us who study technology look at an industry, we understand it's never one thing. You always want to find the silver bullet. It's always about finding a flywheel of activity. And one of the things that encourages me is the flywheel has begun to accelerate. Investment dollars have more than doubled over the past 4 years. As the discourse rises, Silicon Valley notices, and the money follows. So we're beginning to see some very exciting activity within technology startups. Connectivity is increasing. Last year we increased high-speed broadband ready connectivity by about 10%, and that's before the activity that we're seeing at E-rate. We have the longest backlog at E-rate for school connectivity that we've ever had, and it's growing quickly. Devices are happening. We're now at 13.2 devices, 13.2 million devices within K-12. Internationally, K-12 spending on tablets was up 60% last year. And content is proliferating. Certainly from the top, the Common Core is driving it down. But what's most interesting to me, and you'll hear some of this today, is that 80% of teachers are reaching out onto the web to find resources. So it's happening top down, it's happening bottoms up. Extraordinary increase both in the discourse but also in the activity in the industry. But we have to come back to the center of it. I have a friend who's a Special Forces alum, and whenever I talk about tough issues with him, he always says, go to the pain. You got to find the area that's hardest, and you got to go right there and go to it. We know that one of the hardest things in this marketplace is going to be teacher training. So our goal today is a little bit to go to the pain, to talk about how are we going to make the people side of it keep up with the technology side as this revolution continues. We talked about this in the LEAD plan, but at the end of the day, we have to come up with a human capital solution to make sure that the technological tools we give teachers will be deployed correctly. And if we get it wrong, people will mistake our failure on that front for a failure on the technology and the opportunity. We all know it's there. It can change education, but we have to get both the technological and people issues right. I'm back for a second there. What has surprised me most as I've gotten into some of the underlying data on this is the teachers don't need convincing. We thought there was going to be some block that teachers weren't going to want to change. And in fact, what we found is that they know they need training. They want training. They want to bring the tools to the classroom. It's our job to give it to them. It's happening around the world. Tablets are going everywhere, but one of the most profound moments I had as we've talked to other countries is in South Korea, where the Minister of Education looked at me and said, oh yes, our teachers are trained. Now they may have a different definition, but they have adopted an entire national program which has master teachers in each of the schools who have been technology trained, who can then tell the other teachers tools that they might bring to their classroom. When we started to look at this, we were worried about where the money would come from. Yes, we need a lot more money, but there's a lot of dollars in professional development. The question is, just like there were a lot of dollars in E-rate, were they going in the right place? Are there opportunities today to take the money already in the system and task it to this new direction? And lastly, there is appetite. I work a lot with John Hennessy at Stanford, and he uses a term that many of you may have heard before, which is you can't herd the cats, but you can move the cat food. And that's the way education works, right? And the good news here is that training and technology is cat food for teachers. If you give it to them, they will go to it because they want to do the right thing for their kids. 92% of teachers say they want to use more technology in their classroom. So we've got to find that cat food and move it to the right place. So today is about teacher training. Today is about professional development. Today is about taking the devices and truly making it one-to-one-to-one. And we're hopeful that out of the discussion we will bring forward some ideas to increase the discourse out of this very key piece of the flywheel that we all want to get started. Let me introduce my partner in crime here, Jim Steyer, who's going to talk about some of the interesting things happening in the marketplace today, particularly in this area.
I'm going to be really brief. I would shout out Jim Coulter and Margaret and Lee have been amazing colleagues, but Jim Coulter, we wouldn't be here if Jim hadn't been the leader he's been on this stuff. And I agree with what he just said. We're at this major moment of opportunity in stuff. If you think back, we started the lead commission about 2.5 years ago. We had our first big convening about 2 years ago. It is now absolutely taken for granted now in education circles across the country that technology is going to be a fundamental lever for educational progress and change. And that is a huge opportunity for all of us. And I think the focus today on teaching and on 21st century classrooms is exactly where we should be focused. And I think that we're really looking at today as a way to have discussions. One of the great aspects of having Jeff Cowan and Annenberg Sunnylands as a partner is that we don't just do this to have a conference and a summit and talk about all the great things that are going on. We do it and go home. We do it to have a roadmap for what needs to be done in the country for the next 3 years or longer. So that's exactly going to be the focus of the discussion. And I think it's going to be a great day. And the lunch period is going to be a discussion led by Jeff Cowan around that. And we're going to wrap up at the end with a real sense of what we think are the most important things the folks in this room and around the country can get done to move this ball forward. Because if we move the teaching profession forward and we invest in teachers the way that we can and should for 21st century classrooms, the big winners are going to be our kids and in some cases our grandkids. So before we start with Jim Shelton, I'm going to do my introduction for Jim Shelton because he's going to come up after this brief presentation. And Jim has been our colleague from the beginning. You know, he's the Deputy Secretary of Education in the United States, but he has been the driving force in the Department of Education and nationally behind so much of the advancement in the area of technology and education. So he's been our partner in this from day one. We're really glad to have him. Before he comes up and gives his remarks, though, and takes questions from the audience, which I think will be very interesting, ask him some hard questions, folks. He can handle himself. But before that, I'm going to have a couple of my colleagues from Common Sense come up and do a quick 5-minute, here are top 10 things that have been happening in ed tech in the past year or so to show you the momentum that we believe at the Lead Commission that we're seeing on these issues around the country. So I'm going to introduce I'm going to have my two colleagues, Jeff Mao, who just joined us, who many of you guys know from his years running the ed tech programs in the state of Maine, really perhaps the leading state in the country doing education technology. Jeff, come on up. And then my colleague, Rebecca Randall, who's been at Common Sense from the beginning. And they're not going to talk about common sense. They're going to talk about the world of ed tech and all the stuff that's happened. So Rebecca, Jeff, all yours. And then Mr. Shelton, come on up afterwards. Thanks a lot.
So as Jim said, we are going to talk about EdTech trends, or otherwise really known as some cool things that have happened in the EdTech world, in part because they're not really all trends. So we took a little bit of liberty in coming up with a few things that we thought were really important and really exciting things that we've seen over the past year or so. And in true collaborative format, that's been happening, I think, in the education world, in large part because of technology, we crowdsourced our ideas. So Jeff and I did not come up with these in isolation. We talked to our colleagues at Common Sense Education, and we also polled what we call our Common Sense Graphite Certified Educators. These are our version of master teachers that are integrating really great technology into the classroom and sharing all of their insights with teachers throughout the country, really the world. As these ideas were rolling in, a theme started to emerge, and that was one of failing forward. This idea where we are iterating on past practices, and we are really changing things, looking at our failures as mistakes, but fundamentally we are learning from them and really moving forward and coming up with different ideas. And what came out of this was ideas that fundamentally were making education more accessible for kids, and it was giving them more opportunities to connect, to learn, and to collaborate. So with that, I'm going to get started with one of the first trends, which is, failing forward. It exemplifies it, this idea of the maker movement. It is where kids and adults alike are getting their hands dirty. It's where they are creating. It is where they are making and doing, and they are learning from that process. It's where they're trying and they're trying again, whether that is through creating a robot in a fabrication lab or using a 3D printer to create a car. But it's not about that end outcome, it's really about the process. So our friends at the Mozilla Foundation have done a lot with this over the past year. So the Mozilla Maker Party campaign, in the past several months alone, they have organized several thousand events across the globe, and they've ended up reaching nearly 130,000 individuals in 86 countries. And they were engaging kids as creators, not just consumers, and we were sparking their creativity and really facilitating some deeper learning. Next up, we've got social media.
So social media, as we know, is often viewed as the bane of the existence of teachers. They're so fearful of the kids spending all their time on Facebook, and now they're starting to realize that the reason that kids spend time on Facebook or other social media outlets is because they're able to communicate. And kids are communicating, collaborating, and in fact, if you look at across 712, you'll find that 3 out of every 4 students already has a social media profile somewhere. And so now schools are starting to take a hold of this and realize there's something to this. We can leverage this, and so you see sites like Edmodo that literally has millions and millions of accounts of kids and teachers, and in a system that is school safe, built to allow teachers to work with kids, to also to collaborate with each other, share content and ideas, and for kids to be able to share ideas around classwork, course projects, and other things. And so social media is definitely growing and becoming a useful tool in our education markets. The there it comes, homeschool connection. So we're starting to see now the decline, and I think this is probably a good thing for all of us who have been and are parents, the decline of rumpled pieces of paper stuffed in a backpack that was supposed to come home to you for you to sign off on a permission for a field trip or some other thing that you never found because it was so deeply buried in that backpack you didn't see it until Thanksgiving when you finally decided to help your child clean out the backpack. And what we're starting to see are more and more online systems that are allowing teachers and parents to communicate back and forth with each other as well as across, so that it's easier for parents to work with each other on parent volunteer organizations to help the school, because so many parents do want to help the school but maybe can't make it in at the normal appointed hour to come in and shelve books, but there's other things they can be doing for that school. And you're seeing systems like Remind, which just simply does what you think it would do. It helps remind parents of what's going on at the school. And lots of other programs out there, eChalk, Class Dojo, Reading with Fundamentals, Starfall, all kinds of different programs out there that are doing these types of programs to help teachers and parents communicate better, parents to parents, and again, just building that school community.
And not to be left behind, teachers are also engaging in social media and really creating what they call professional learning communities or professional learning networks. And what we have found is that they are doing that not only in sites like Edmodo, which have been created specifically for educators, but also through the co-opting of Twitter and through really working on Pinterest. So they are getting ideas for classroom implementation. They are pinning things to their canvases and really trying to get ideas out there, and they're going to these sites to really learn from them. And it allows them to not only get these ideas, but also to network with one another. They're collaborating, troubleshooting obstacles, developing best practices, and really connecting with one another in a way that they've never been able to do before because technology has allowed them to do that. In the words of one of our certified educators, her quote was, "I remember when you could talk to friends and coworkers or buy books for ideas. The quick exchange of ideas and sharing through technology is amazing, and while it's time-consuming, it is much easier than it was a few years ago." So this ability to connect in real time and with a mass audience is not just for students, but also for our teachers.
So privacy obviously has been and continues to be a major issue across the country in all industries, all walks of life. Education is not to be excluded in that space. And I think we just need to continue to remember, and I think we're continuing to see lots of work in this area, the alphabet soup of the organizations of both Washington, D.C. and everywhere else across the country. We're all talking about privacy and trying to find and strike that balance between protecting our students and their privacy, but at the same time being able to use that data for the better of their education, because we all know that that's part of the promise of education. And one of the drivers of that is the capacity to leverage that data to help kids find the content that they need, to find the resources that are going to help them the most, and at the same time protect them, because that's always been our number one goal in our schools, to protect our kids. The E-rate, of course, is a topic that was referenced earlier by Jim Coulter, and it's something I think we'll hear more about later today from FCC Chairman Wheeler. But again, in this past year, we saw the first major change in the E-rate system with adoption of completely new funding structures and hopefully new streamlined processes that will only going to continue to further the value of this program. 2 years ago, here in Washington, D.C., at the State Ed Tech Directors Association meetings, we brought together 3 of the, at the time, current and 2 past instructional technology directors from the U.S. Department of Ed. And when we asked them what was the number one thing in education technology policy that you think has been most impactful over the years, they all agreed. And then you can imagine in Washington, D.C., to get a lot of people to agree on anything is difficult. They all agreed, E-rate, hands down. And it's great to see that that is continuing to roll forward.
Something else that's continued to roll forward is authentic assessment. So digital portfolios are nothing new, but they're seeing certainly a reemergence, and I think that the idea of giving kids the ability to find what they are most interested in, it's the reflection process, and then put it out there. So through sites like 3-Ring Binder and Weebly, they're able to take and encapsulate their work and put it forward in a way that is much more authentic for their learning process, and it's something that we're pretty excited about as it moves forward. Google. So Google's presence in education, I think, has led to, certainly more competition in the market. And over the past year, because of Chromebooks and because of Google Apps for Education, more and more districts have decided that it's affordable to go one-to-one, or as Jim said, one-to-one-to-one. And with more schools that are using Google devices, it's increased the need for apps in the marketplace that work on Android platforms. So we're seeing more and more education content within the Android realm. And while the content, can sometimes be a little bit inconsistent, again, kind of failing forward, they're learning from this, and developers are putting out more content. And oftentimes, the Android tablets and the devices themselves tend to be a little bit more teacher-centric, and it's accounting for a learning environment where there needs to be communication between the students' devices and the teachers. all of this content is leading to more and more of a need and a demand for being able to sort and sift through all of it. Teachers, desperately need that help, and we have seen that happen with Common Sense Media's Graphite, just a remarkable growth in the past year. So our Graphite site, where we are rating the learning potential of apps, games, websites, but also really connecting teachers and allowing them to find and create lesson plans and communicate and collaborate with one another. So it's building on the idea of professional learning communities. We have seen about 100% growth over the past year in the site. We've had 1.4 million teachers use the site, and most exciting to us, they've created thousands of lesson plans, and we have about 1,600 product reviews on Graphite that, again, look at the learning potential of all this digital content that's being created, so teachers know, is it going to actually work in my classroom and how to use it? We have 6,000 teacher reviews of these products. So teachers are going on and they are putting what they think works well and sharing their best practices. Because it's not just about knowing how to use the device, it's about how to implement it with fidelity and through innovative ideas.
And finally, we have coding. I think we've all seen that coding is becoming more and more of a mainstream topic. With the hour of code that splashed across the country, thousands and thousands of kids taking part in that program. And along with this, now we see a rise in the numbers of apps and systems that are being specifically designed to help kids, well, really anybody, but generally definitely kids, learning how to code in lots of different ways, whether it's Mozilla Thimble to Code Academy, programs like Scratch and Codea, Hopscotch. If you have kids and they're under the age of, say, 16, I bet they play Minecraft, and it may annoy you because you just don't understand what they're digging for, right? But you may want to go look up a place called ThoughtStem down in San Diego that has developed a technology that allows kids to learn to program in Minecraft. A hugely engaging environment. Really fabulous stuff. And the last piece I wanted to share was just a brief story at the beginning of our one-to-one program in Maine. Steve Jobs came to Maine. Very not well-known reality that he actually flew out to Maine to speak, because usually when Steve Jobs speaks, there's a big film crew and it gets webcast and everybody knows about it. This was not well-known, and he addressed a crowd of folks at Portland High School at the launch of this program. That was the day he actually learned that they were launching, not only were they launching his devices, but they were going to be running OS 10 for the first time ever. He didn't even realize they were going to do it on OS 10. And that day, he shared a little bit of a conversation with these teachers and said, when we were in school, the medium of our generation was the written word. And in order for us to be facile with the written word, we had to be both consumers and producers of the medium of our generation. We had to learn to read and to write. He said that was extremely critical, and it continues to be critical. This was in 2002, pre-YouTube, pre-streaming video online. He said, the medium of today's generation is video, but how many kids can produce video? Right? And what he was very excited about was, in Maine now, every middle school student is going to have a laptop with iMovie, and they can learn to produce content in the medium of their generation. And I think if we look at today, and you've been to, say, Walmart, and you see a little kid about this tall walk up to a big 50-inch plasma screen and start doing this, it doesn't work, right? The medium of today's generation, that media, it's not the written word so much anymore. It's not just watching video. It's full interactive. And you don't get full interactive if you're not coding. And I think it's really important now. We see kids are starting to now learn how do they generate the media of their generation, and that's coding.
And I think sometimes schools have not always found the time to add in coding, and that's perhaps seen as a misstep, but it's where other organizations are really filling the gap and have been able to come in and to offer their resources and services to help kids. And it's just a good example of how there are things that haven't quite gone right this year, some of them in a very, very public way, but where we've taken that, we're learning from it, and as Jim Coulter said, let's go with the pain. So we'll frame it and close things up in the words of John Dewey. Failure is instructive. The person who really thinks learns quite as much from his failures as from his successes. So we, the big collective we in this room, do have the opportunity to iterate on past practices and move forward. And that's the goal of today, is to move forward with professional development.